The desperate call, the golden halls of the Valorian Empire had never felt so cold. Ambassador Krextal stood before the emergency council, his forearms trembling not from fear but from the weight of what he was about to propose. The holographic displays floating around the chamber showed the same devastating truth from every corner of their vast empire. Red zones marked where the plague had already consumed all organic matter. Yellow zones showed areas with less than 40 days of food remaining. There were no green zones left. The plague had started small, just a single agricultural station on the outer rim reporting unusual crop failures 3 cycles ago. The Valorians, masters of biotechnology for over 2,000 years, had dismissed it as a minor contamination issue. They were wrong. The organism, if it could even be called that, consumed organic matter at the molecular level and converted it into a crystalline dust that poisoned the soil for generations. It spread through spores that could survive in the vacuum of space, hitchhiking on cargo ships and spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. Krextal watched as Supreme Chancellor Vorchin reviewed the latest reports. The Chancellor's usually vibrant purple skin had faded to a sickly gray, a sign of extreme stress in their species. Around the circular chamber, representatives from the Empire's 37 member species sat in silence, the Quellans with their delicate wings folded tight against their bodies. The massive Grontak delegates hunched over, their usually proud bearing broken by desperation. Even the synthetic Makari, who didn't need food themselves, understood that the collapse of the biological species would mean the end of their civilization too. "We have exhausted all conventional options," the Chancellor said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Our scientists cannot stop this plague. Our military cannot fight it. Our allies in the Galactic Consortium have closed their borders to prevent contamination. We stand alone and we stand at the edge of extinction." Krextal stepped forward. He had spent the last 10 days preparing for this moment, knowing that what he was about to suggest would either save them all or mark the end of Valorian pride forever. "There is one option we haven't considered," he said, his voice steady despite the churning in his primary stomach. "The humans." The reaction was immediate and predictable. Several delegates hissed in disgust. Others laughed bitterly. The humans were known throughout the galaxy, but not for any great achievements. They were the species that had nearly destroyed their own planet multiple times. They fought wars over resources while surrounded by abundance. They were emotional, irrational, and utterly unpredictable. Most civilized species avoided them entirely. The humans? Chancellor Vorchin's tone carried disbelief. The species that still uses chemical rockets? That has barely colonized their own solar system? What could they possibly offer us? Krextal had anticipated this response. He activated his personal hologram, displaying data he had gathered over the past days. 3 solar cycles ago, the Zaran Collective experienced a similar crisis. Not as severe as ours, but significant. 40 million of their people faced starvation after solar flares destroyed their agricultural infrastructure. They sent a message to Earth not expecting much. The humans arrived in less than 20 hours with something they called an emergency response fleet. Within 3 days, they were feeding the entire affected population. Within 2 weeks, they had rebuilt the entire agricultural system, better than it was before. The chamber fell silent. The Zaran Collective had never publicly acknowledged receiving help from anyone, let alone humans. Krextal continued. "I've also discovered that humans currently produce enough food to feed approximately 3 times their own population. They throw away more food than some species produce in total. They've turned farming into something approaching an art form. But at what cost?" asked Delegate Yimtar, her crystalline form catching the light. "What did the humans demand in return?" "According to my sources," Krextal said carefully, "they asked for local soil samples and climate data to better adapt their crops. That was all." The disbelief in the room was palpable. No species helped another without expecting something in return. It was a fundamental law of galactic politics. Resources were finite. Everything had a price. The idea that humans would simply give away food was incomprehensible. Chancellor Vorchin stood slowly, his decision weighing on him. "How long do we have?" "The core worlds have perhaps 60 days of food. The outer colonies less than 30. After that, societal collapse is inevitable." The vote was called. It wasn't unanimous, but it didn't need to be. 23 species voted in favor of contacting Earth. 14 voted against, preferring extinction to the shame of begging humans for help. The message was composed that very hour. It was formal, diplomatic, and carefully worded to appeal to human psychology without revealing the full extent of Valorian desperation. They transmitted it using their most powerful arrays, expecting to wait weeks for a response. Earth was far from Valorian space, and humans didn't have faster-than-light communication technology, or so everyone believed. Krextal spent the next hours in his quarters, wondering if he had just saved his people or signed their death warrant. Humans were unpredictable. They might come as saviors, or they might see weakness and come as conquerors. 16 hours later, his communication unit erupted with alerts. He rushed to the command center to find controlled chaos. "Sir," the communication officer called out, his voice shaking. "We're detecting massive FTL signatures approaching our space. Hundreds of them." Krextal felt his heart stop. Hundreds of ships? This wasn't a rescue mission. This was an invasion fleet. Had he been wrong about human intentions? On the main screen, the first vessels began dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of Valorian territory. They were enormous, each one dwarfing even the Empire's largest battleships. But as the sensors began analyzing their structure, confusion replaced fear. These weren't warships. They had no weapons, no shields, no military configurations at all. Instead, the sensors detected massive biodomes, atmospheric processors, water reclamation systems, and what appeared to be vast hydroponic gardens. The ships looked less like vessels and more like flying farms, each one the size of a small moon. A message came through, simple and direct. "This is Admiral Sarah Thompson of the Terran Emergency Response Fleet. We received your distress call. The harvest ships are here. Please transmit coordinates for food distribution centers and any dietary restrictions for your species. We'll handle the rest." Krextal stared at the screen in disbelief. No negotiations, no demands, no threats, just a simple statement that help had arrived. The humans had crossed half the galaxy in less than a day with enough ships to feed billions, and they acted like it was routine. "Sir," the sensor officer whispered, "I'm counting over 300 vessels and more are still arriving. Each one appears to be a completely self-contained agricultural system. The amount of food production capability, it's beyond anything in our databases." As Krextal watched the human fleet arrange itself in orbit around the dying Valorian worlds, one thought kept repeating in his mind. What kind of species builds a fleet of farming ships the size of moons and keeps them ready just in case someone, somewhere might be hungry? He was about to learn that everything the galaxy thought it knew about humans was wrong. They weren't primitive. They weren't just survivors. They were something far more extraordinary. They were the species that had turned feeding others into their greatest achievement. The first human shuttle requested permission to dock within the hour. It was time to meet their unlikely saviors face to face. The impossible feast. The human who stepped onto the Valorian station looked nothing like a savior. Captain Marcus Chen was short by human standards, with graying hair and work-worn hands. His uniform wasn't military crisp, but rather showed the comfortable wear of someone who used it for actual work. Behind him, a team of 20 humans emerged, each carrying equipment that looked more suited for a farm than a diplomatic meeting. Krextal had prepared formal greeting ceremonies, but Chen walked right past the honor guard, his attention focused on a handheld scanner. "Ambassador Krextal, good to meet you. We need to talk about your atmospheric composition. The readings we're getting suggest higher nitrogen content than Earth normal. That's actually perfect for some of our hybrid crops." He looked up, finally seeming to notice the elaborate reception. "Oh, sorry. Were we doing a thing?" "We can do formal greetings if you want, but people are hungry and I'd rather get started." The directness was jarring. Valorian culture prized elaborate ceremony and protocol, but there was something refreshing about the human's attitude. Chen wasn't here to play politics. He was here to solve a problem. Krextal found himself adapting quickly. "What do you need from us?" "Information, mostly," Chen replied, already walking toward the observation windows that looked out at the dying planet below. "Soil samples from each continent, detailed dietary requirements for all 37 species in your empire, local growing seasons, water table data, and whatever information you have on this plague." He paused, studying the barren landscape visible below. "That's the real problem, isn't it? Not just current starvation, but the fact that you can't grow anything new." "Our greatest scientists have studied it for 3 cycles," Krextal said, unable to hide his despair. "Nothing stops it. It consumes everything organic, Chen nodded thoughtfully. We've seen similar things. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Life always finds a way to eat other life. The trick isn't to stop it, but to grow faster than it can consume. He turned to his team. Martinez, I want the Mark 7 biodomes deployed within 6 hours. Kim, start the soil rehabilitation program. Use the Australian formula, the one we developed after the cobalt incident. The humans scattered with practiced efficiency. Through the observation windows, Krextal watched as the massive harvest ships began to transform. Sections of their hulls opened like flower petals, revealing vast transparent domes. Within minutes, green began to appear, plants growing at an impossible rate. How? Was all he could manage. Chen smiled. Genetic engineering, time acceleration fields, and about 2 centuries of practice fixing our own mistakes. Earth went through 17 different ecological collapses before we figured out how to grow food faster than we could destroy it. Now we're really good at it. Over the next few hours, Krextal followed Chen through the human operations, each revelation more astounding than the last. The biodomes weren't just farms. They were complete ecosystems, with insects for pollination, microorganisms for soil health, and even small animals for natural fertilization. The humans had brought entire slices of Earth's biosphere with them. But the plague, Krextal protested, it will consume these too. Probably, Chen agreed cheerfully. That's why we brought 6 different agricultural systems. The plague might eat through 2 or 3 of them, but something will survive and adapt. It always does. He checked his tablet. Speaking of which, we're ready for the first harvest. Would you like to organize a distribution ceremony? We found that public feeding events help with morale. The ceremony was held in the capital city's largest plaza, hastily cleared and prepared. Krextal had expected something simple, perhaps nutrient paste or basic grain distribution. What the humans delivered defied all expectations. They hadn't just brought food. They had brought a feast. Hundreds of human chefs worked alongside automated cooking systems, preparing dishes adapted for each species. The Quellans received delicate nectar-based soups that matched their traditional foods. The Grontak were served massive roasted vegetables that resembled their ceremonial feast dishes. Even the Machari, who didn't eat, were presented with aromatic oils for their social consumption rituals. The plaza filled with beings who hadn't seen real food in months. Many were crying, though whether from joy or shame Krextal couldn't tell. Chancellor Vorchin himself came down from his tower, something he hadn't done in decades. He approached Chen, who was personally serving food to a line of Valorian children. Why? The Chancellor asked simply. Why would your species do this? Chen paused in his serving, considering the question. Honestly? Because we can. Humans spent most of our history hungry. We fought wars over food, watched civilizations collapse from famine. Then, about 200 years ago, we figured out how to grow more than we needed. It was like discovering fire all over again. We went a little crazy with it. Built bigger and bigger farms, developed new crops, turned deserts into gardens. Then we looked around and realized we were growing enough food for 50 billion people on a planet with only 12 billion. He resumed serving, ladling soup into bowls with practiced ease. Some wanted to scale back production. Others wanted to export it for profit. But then someone asked a simple question. What if we kept it all ready just in case someone needed it? What if we became the galaxy's emergency food supply? The vote was close, but it passed. We've been building harvest ships ever since. But you gain nothing from this, Fortune pressed. Chen shrugged. We gain neighbors who aren't starving. We gain knowledge about new ecosystems and agricultural challenges. We gain friends, he smiled. Besides, humans are weird. We get genuine joy from feeding others. It's hardwired into our culture. Every human celebration involves sharing food. It's who we are. As the feast continued, something remarkable happened. The different species of the Valorian Empire, who had been growing apart in their desperation, began to come together. They shared tables, tried each other's foods, and remembered what it meant to be a community. The humans moved among them, not as saviors or conquerors, but as hosts at a very large dinner party. Within a week, the transformation was visible from space. Green patches appeared on dead worlds, spreading like healing wounds. The harvest ships deployed smaller vessels that descended to the surface, each one establishing a protected growing zone that slowly expanded outward. The plague still existed, but it was being outpaced by growth. Within a month, the empire was not just surviving, but beginning to thrive. The humans had done more than bring food. They had brought hope, knowledge, and a new way of thinking about resources. They taught Valorian scientists their techniques, shared their genetic databases, and even helped design new crops specifically adapted to Valorian conditions. When it came time for the human fleet to leave, Krextall found himself standing again before the council. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. "They're refusing payment," he announced, still hardly believing it himself. "Admiral Thompson says they've been paid in full with the agricultural data we've shared and the friendship we've offered." Chancellor Vorchin stood, his purple skin restored to its healthy vibrance. "Then we shall give them something they don't expect. Full membership in the Valorian Empire, with all rights and privileges, and something more." He gestured, and the great seal of the Empire appeared on the holographic display. Below it, new words were being inscribed in both Valorian script and Earth Standard: "The Harvest Alliance." "Let it be known throughout the galaxy," Fortune declared, "that Earth stands ready to feed any who hunger, and the Valorian Empire stands ready to defend those who feed others." The message went out across the galaxy within hours. The primitive humans, the species everyone had dismissed, had just become the most important race in known space, not through military might or technological superiority, but through the simple act of sharing food with those in need. Captain Chen, preparing to depart, left Krextall with one final thought. "You know what the funny thing is? This mission, feeding your entire empire, used about 2% of our current agricultural capacity. We're already planning to triple production, just in case." As the harvest ships departed, leaving behind green worlds and full stomachs, Krextall realized the galaxy had learned an important lesson. Humans might not be the strongest species or the smartest or the most advanced, but they were the species that had turned compassion into a technology, generosity into a weapons system, and feeding others into their greatest achievement. The plague was eventually defeated, but the Harvest Alliance endured. And throughout the galaxy, beings would remember the day when humanity answered a call for help not with warships or demands, but with the largest dinner party in galactic history.